The cold night. The desert night was bitter cold, colder than any human should face without shelter. The wind howled like a wild beast, tearing across the endless dunes. Sand scraped against the small tent, scratching its thin walls. Inside, the human sat close to the fire he had built. His clothes were worn, his face tired, but his eyes stayed sharp. He had survived many nights like this, alone, far away from home. Then he heard it. At first, it was only a faint sound, like a whimper, a soft cry carried by the wind. He froze, thinking it was only the desert playing tricks on his ears, but then it came again, weak, trembling, desperate. He stood up quickly, pulling his coat tighter. His boots pressed deep into the cold sand. As he stepped out of the tent, the desert stretched out before him, empty, endless, silent except for that small sound. He turned his head and then he saw her. A tiny figure was crouched beside a rock, shivering violently, her body small, her hair tangled with sand. Her skin gave off a faint glow under the moonlight. Not human skin, but alien. Her eyes, too large for her face, shone like two frightened stars, the human's breath caught in his chest. She was just a child, but not from Earth. She looked weak, lost, ready to collapse into the sand. He spoke softly. "Hey, it's too cold out here." The girl flinched, her thin arms wrapped around her knees as if his voice might harm her. She stared at him like he was both her last hope and her greatest fear. "You'll freeze," he said again. This time he raised, his hand slowly pointing to the tent. "Come inside, warmth." She shook her head fast. Her lips moved, whispering words in a language he could not understand. Fear filled every motion of her body. Her legs were too weak to run, but her heart was strong enough to resist. The human sighed. He knew what those eyes meant. She did not trust him, and why would she? He was human. She was alien, alone in the dark. Trust did not come easy. Still, he stepped closer, his movements careful, slow. He did not want to scare her more. The fire inside the tent flickered behind him, casting shadows across the sand. He pointed again to the firelight. "Warm food," he said simply. Her stomach answered before she did. A loud growl echoed in the night. Her eyes widened, shame flooding her face. She pulled her knees tighter to hide her hunger. He knelt down in the sand. His voice was quiet now, almost a whisper. "You're not safe here. If you stay, the night will take you." For a long moment, nothing happened. Only the wind moved between them, carrying sand and silence. Then slowly she lifted her head, her glowing eyes locked on his face, searching for something. Truth, kindness, or maybe weakness. She stood, her body trembling. Her steps were small, heavy, but she followed the faint warmth coming from his tent. He moved aside, holding the flap open. The heat of the fire spilled out into the desert night, inviting her in. Inside, she crouched low near the fire, like a creature ready to run if danger showed. Her hands reached out, shaking, catching the heat. She hissed softly when the warmth stung her cold skin. But soon her breathing calmed. The human sat across from her, his eyes studying her carefully. She was younger than he thought. Her thin clothes were torn, her feet bare and cut, her cheeks hollow from hunger. He pulled a small pack from beside him and opened it. Inside, a few pieces of dried food remained. He broke one and held it out. Her eyes narrowed. Suspicion clouded her face. She looked at the food, then at him, as if waiting for a trap. "It's safe," he said, taking a bite from his own piece, chewing slowly so she could see. Only then did she reach forward. Her fingers brushed against his hand, cold and trembling. She took the food and placed it in her mouth, chewing slowly. Her body shook as she swallowed. The taste was strange to her, but it gave her strength. Minutes passed in silence. Only the fire crackled between them. Outside, the desert raged with wind. But inside, in that small tent, a fragile peace formed. The human leaned back, watching her, his mind filled with questions. Who was she? Where had she come from? Why was she alone in such a deadly night? But the girl said nothing. Only her glowing eyes spoke, filled with both fear and secrets. When the firelight touched her face, he noticed something strange. On her neck, half hidden, beneath her hair a faint mark glowed. It looked like a symbol, burned or carved into her skin. She noticed his stare and quickly pulled her hair over it. Her eyes darted up, warning him silently. "Do not ask. Do not speak." The human frowned, but he said nothing. Not tonight. He could wait. Outside, the storm grew stronger. The night was long. And inside that tent, a human and a tiny alien girl sat together in silence. The fire kept them alive, but trust had not yet been born. Only the cold night watched, and the secret she carried burned quietly beneath her skin, unseen, waiting to be revealed. Strange eyes in the firelight. The fire burned low inside the small tent. Its flames danced weakly, sending shadows crawling across the cloth walls. The desert storm outside roared like a living beast. But in here, it was only the crackle of fire and the faint breathing of two strangers. The human leaned forward, feeding another stick into the flames. His eyes kept moving toward the girl. She sat curled near the fire, her knees pulled tight against her chest, her thin arms wrapped around herself as if she feared the heat might vanish any second. Her eyes, they were not human. They glowed faintly in the firelight, shimmering like liquid stars, sometimes gold, sometimes blue, as if they changed with every flicker of flame. The human had seen many alien species before, but never eyes like hers. They were too sharp, too alive, too haunting. She noticed his stare and looked down quickly. Her hair fell across her face, hiding her expression. The tent went quiet again. Only the storm outside dared to speak. The human cleared his throat. His voice, "Kamquam, what's your name?" She looked up slowly. Her lips moved, but the sound that came out was broken. Soft, like a bird's call in the dark. A language he could not understand. Her words fell into silence. And then she shook her head. Her hand pressed against her chest, her small fingers tapping once, twice, almost like a rhythm. Maybe she was trying to tell him something, maybe her name, but he could not catch it. He sighed. "All right, no name." His voice was gentle. "I'll just call you Little Star, until you tell me otherwise." Her glowing eyes widened at the sound of his words, almost as if the name had touched something inside her. She didn't answer, but she didn't push it away either. The fire popped loudly, making her flinch. Her eyes darted to the tent's opening as if expecting someone to burst in. She whispered something again in her tongue, her voice full of fear. Her hands clutched the small piece of food he had given earlier as if it was her last shield. The human leaned back slowly. His instincts told him something was wrong. This girl was not just lost. She was hiding. She was running from something or someone. He studied her closer, and that was when he saw it. Her skin, pale and faintly glowing, was marked with strange lines. Not scars, not dirt, but patterns, almost like veins of light crawling under her skin. They pulsed faintly, matching the rhythm of her heartbeat. When her eyes lifted again, he saw it clearer. The firelight revealed a truth that unsettled him. Her eyes were not just glowing. They were alive, shifting with colors, hiding secrets no child should carry. He whispered under his breath. "What are you?" She tilted her head, not understanding. But the way her body stiffened told him she knew what kind of question it was, the kind that could break fragile trust. Before he could ask more, the storm outside screamed louder. The walls of the tent shook as the wind clawed at them. The girl let out a small cry and crawled closer to the fire. Her glowing eyes locked on his face now, desperate, searching. It felt as if those eyes were asking him a question he could not hear. A question about safety, about survival, about trust. For a moment, the human felt something strange, as if the firelight had tied them together. He didn't know her. She didn't know him. Yet her eyes looked at him like he was the only thing keeping her alive. He reached into his pack again, pulling out a small canteen. He offered it forward. "Water," he said simply. She stared at it, then at him, her glowing eyes narrowed with suspicion. But after a long pause, she reached out. Her small hand shook as she took the canteen. She drank, then coughed, the liquid strange on her tongue. But she didn't stop. She was thirsty more than he guessed. When she finished, she handed it back. Her glowing eyes softened just slightly. The human gave a small nod. "Good," he said. "Better." Silence returned, heavy and thick. The storm outside raged, but inside the fire burned on. Then, out of nowhere, she spoke again. A single word in her strange tongue, but this time she pointed at him while saying it. Her voice trembled but carried weight. He frowned, repeating the sound awkwardly. She shook her head, tried again, pointing again at him, then at herself. She was trying to teach him. Slowly, piece by piece, he realized she was naming, maybe telling him who she was, or asking who he was. He touched his chest. "John," he said, his voice steady. "My name is John." Her eyes lit brighter for a moment, as if she understood. She repeated, "Joe, and..." Her tongue struggled with the shape of the word, but the effort was there. For the first time, she gave a small, weak smile. It was faint, fragile, but it was real. The human felt something stir inside him, a warmth stronger than the fire. He had brought her into the tent to keep her from freezing, but now sitting across from those strange glowing eyes, he realized something. Sitting across from those strange glowing eyes, he realized something. He hadn't just saved her life tonight. He had stepped into something much deeper, something that would not end with the storm. The girl hugged her knees again, but her eyes no longer carried only fear. They carried something else now, trust, or at least the beginning of it. The human lay back slowly, staring at the tent ceiling, his mind restless. Her strange eyes haunted him. They were not just eyes of a child. They were eyes carrying a story, a danger, maybe even a destiny. And as the storm screamed louder outside, John knew one thing for certain. This night was only the beginning, a hunger. He didn't expect. The storm outside did not rest. It screamed and tore at the small tent, shaking the thin walls like fragile paper. But inside, the fire fought bravely, sending its warmth across the cramped space. The human, John, sat with his back against the tent wall, his eyes half closed, listening. To the storm, the girl sat across from him, curled like a small shadow beside the fire. Her glowing eyes reflected the flames, sharp and restless. Her silence had weight. Every small movement, every quick glance carried hidden meaning. John could feel it. She was hiding more than fear. Then, in the stillness, came the sound. It was faint at first, then louder, her stomach growling. The sound echoed awkwardly in the small tent. Her eyes widened, her cheeks flushed a pale color. She quickly wrapped her arms around her belly, ashamed, as if hunger was a crime. John sat up straighter. His hand moved to his pack. "Hungry?" he said simply. His voice was calm, steady, almost fatherly. The girl shook her head. Her hair fell across her face as she whispered something in her strange tongue. Her eyes avoided his, but her body betrayed her. Her fingers clutched the ground, trembling. John pulled out the last of his rations, a small piece of dried meat, a few crumbs of bread, hardly enough for one man, let alone two. He chewed his lip, staring at it. He had planned to save it for the next day. The desert was cruel. Food was harder to find than water. But then he looked at her. She was watching the fire, not daring to look at him. Her body shivered, not from cold this time, but weakness. Her tiny hands pressed harder against her stomach, as if trying to silence the hunger inside. John's decision came without thought. He broke the food into halves, sliding one piece toward her. "Eat," he said firmly. The girl froze. Her glowing eyes shot to him, wide with suspicion. Her head shook fast. She whispered again, shaking her head so hard her tangled hair brushed against the firelight. John took his piece, chewed it slowly, swallowed, then nodded at her. "Safe," he said, tapping his chest. "Good." Her glowing eyes searched his face for truth. For a long moment, the storm filled the silence between them. Then, hesitantly, she reached out. Her thin fingers trembled as they took the food from his hand. She lifted it to her lips, sniffed it, and then finally took a small bite. The moment the food touched her tongue, her body reacted. She coughed, almost choking. Her eyes watered. She pressed her hand to her mouth. John leaned forward, alarmed. "Hey, easy." But then something strange happened. Her glowing eyes flared brighter, shifting colors rapidly, blue to gold, gold to green. Her body shook, not from sickness, but from something else. Something powerful. Her small frame trembled as she forced the food down. John frowned, worry growing. "What's happening?" he muttered. The girl gasped, her chest rising and falling quickly. For a second, he thought she was in pain. Then she let out a long breath. Her body relaxed, her eyes dimmed, back to normal glow. She looked at him, weak but calmer. John blinked, confused. "You're all right?" She gave the faintest nod, chewing the rest slowly. This time her body didn't resist. She swallowed carefully. Her breathing steadied. John leaned back, rubbing his forehead. "Great," he muttered. "Nearly scared me to death." The girl tilted her head at his words, not understanding. But when she saw his exhale of relief, her lips curved into a tiny smile, almost playful, almost innocent. But behind that small smile, John saw something else. Gratitude, and maybe the first thread of trust. She finished her food quickly, licking her fingers like a starved child. Her glowing eyes softened. Her shoulders eased. Her body no longer curled into itself. But just as John began to feel the weight of worry lift, he noticed something strange. Her skin, faintly glowing before, now shimmered brighter. The strange lines beneath her skin pulsed faster. Her heartbeat thudded so loud he could almost hear it. John stared. "That's not normal," he whispered. The girl noticed his stare. Quickly she pulled her hair over her face, tugged her arms around her body again. She shook her head, whispering something sharp in her language. Her voice carried fear. Fear of being discovered. John didn't push her. He leaned back, sighing, his eyes narrowed. She wasn't just some lost child. She was carrying something. Maybe a secret so heavy even she struggled to hold it. The storm outside grew wilder, as if nature itself warned of danger. The girl hugged her knees, hiding her face in her arms. Her glowing eyes peeked out, staring at the human across from her. And then, just before sleep took her, she whispered something. A single word, soft, broken, but clear enough for him to catch. It sounded like safe. John's chest tightened. He didn't know if she had said it about him, the tent, or the fire. But he knew one thing. Her trust had begun to form, and that meant whatever she was, running from would soon come looking. Outside, the storm raged on. But inside the tent, hunger had been fed, fear had softened, and something new had been born. A bond neither of them expected. The hidden mark. The storm outside faded slowly with the coming dawn. The first pale light of morning slipped through the cracks of the tent, painting the walls in soft gray. The fire had burned down to glowing embers, leaving only faint warmth. John opened his eyes and stretched his stiff shoulders. He had dozed lightly, never fully trusting sleep in this cruel desert. His first glance went to the girl. She was still curled near the fire pit, her thin body wrapped in silence. Her breathing was shallow but steady. Her glowing eyes were closed. Her face looked peaceful for the first time since he had found her. But as the morning light touched her skin, John noticed something new. Beneath her tangled hair, along the side of her neck, a faint mark glowed. It wasn't like the natural veins of light that had spread across her body before. This was different, sharper, deliberate, almost like a brand carved into her skin long ago. He leaned closer, narrowing his eyes. The mark was circular, with strange lines and symbols spiraling outward. It looked old, ancient even, yet it pulsed, faintly alive as if reacting to the morning sun. The girl stirred suddenly, her eyes snapped open. Glowing bright as firelight, she caught him staring, and in a flash her small hand flew to her neck. She pulled her hair down, covering the mark. Her breath quickened, panic filling her face. John froze, raising his hands in peace. "Easy," he said softly. "I didn't mean," but she shook her head fast, desperate. Her lips moved rapidly, words spilling out in her alien tongue. The sound sharp, frightened. She pressed her hair tighter, whispering like a prayer. John sat back, his heart pounding. That mark, whatever it was, meant danger. He could feel it. He didn't need to understand her words to know it was something forbidden, something that should stay hidden. She hugged her knees, her glowing eyes darting to the tent's opening, as if she feared someone might burst in at any second. Her small body trembled like a leaf caught in a storm. John sighed, leaning back against the tent wall, his voice calm. "All right. You don't want me to ask, I won't." Her eyes flicked to him, unsure, her lips pressed tight. Then slowly, she relaxed, just a little. Her hand still guarded the mark, but her panic lessened. The silence stretched, heavy and thick. Only the soft hiss of dying embers broke it. John's thoughts turned restless. That mark, he had seen symbols like it before, not the same, but similar. In old ruins, in broken carvings left behind by civilizations far older than his. It was no ordinary tattoo. It carried meaning, maybe even power. He studied the girl again, her glowing eyes, her strange reaction to food, the patterns under her skin. Now the hidden mark. Everything about her screamed of mystery. Who was she really? The girl shifted suddenly, her eyes locked on him, sharp as if reading his thoughts. She whispered something low, her voice trembling. Then slowly, she reached out. Her small fingers brushed against his wrist. A gesture so small yet filled. With meaning, John looked down at her. Her glowing eyes were wet, shimmering with unshed tears. She shook her head once more, whispering the same broken word she had used before. "Safe." His chest tightened. He gave a small nod. "Safe," he repeated, his voice steady. For the first time, the girl lowered her hands from her neck. She still kept her hair covering the mark, but her shoulders eased. She leaned closer to the fire, her trust fragile but growing. The tent grew warmer with the morning sun. Outside, the desert stretched endless and silent. For a moment, it felt like peace might hold. But then, a sound cut through the stillness, distant, faint but real. Voices carried by the wind, not one but several, speaking in the same strange tongue as the girl. Their tone was sharp, commanding, hunting. The girl stiffened instantly, her glowing eyes wide with terror. She looked at John, her lips parting in a silent plea. Her whole body shook. John's heart raced. He grabbed his pack and doused the embers quickly, smoke rising faintly. He looked at her. "Hunters?" he asked. She nodded violently. Her lips formed a single word, broken but clear enough for him to understand. "Danger." The voices outside grew closer, boots crunching against sand, the sound of weapons clinking faintly. John's jaw tightened. He glanced at the girl, her glowing eyes staring at him with desperation. The mark on her neck seemed to pulse brighter now, as if it reacted to the presence of those outside. He cursed under his breath. "What have I dragged myself into?" The girl crawled to his side, gripping his arm with surprising strength. Her small body pressed against him as if he was her shield. The footsteps stopped just outside the tent. Shadows moved across the fabric walls. A voice called out, deep and commanding. Words John couldn't understand, but the girl understood. Her body shook harder. She clutched his arm, whispering frantically in her tongue, her eyes begging him not to give her away. John's pulse thundered. His eyes darted to the flap of the tent. His mind raced. He could hand her over. Maybe live, maybe survive. Or he could protect her, but protect her from what? The mark, the hunters, the glowing eyes. It all pointed to something larger, something far more dangerous than just a lost alien child. The tent fell silent. The hunters waited outside. The girl's glowing eyes locked on him, holding both fear and hope. And John realized his choice would decide both their fates. The desert morning was still pale when the first shadow crossed the tent wall. John's muscles tightened. His hand moved slowly toward the small knife by his side. It wasn't much against armed men, but it was better than nothing. The girl clung to his arm, her glowing eyes wide with panic. Her tiny body trembled so hard he could feel it through his sleeve. She whispered in her alien tongue, fast and broken, but he caught one word again and again. "Danger, danger, danger!" The voice outside called once more, deeper now, commanding. The words were sharp, like the crack of a whip. John couldn't understand the language, but he didn't need to. Whoever was out there wasn't asking politely, they were demanding. The girl pressed her hair tighter over her neck, hiding the glowing mark. Her breath came in short gasps. She shook her head violently at John, begging him without words. John leaned closer, his voice a whisper. "Quiet," he said, placing a finger. Against his lips, she nodded quickly, but tears shimmered in her glowing eyes. Outside, boots crunched against sand, moving slowly around the tent. John counted at least 4, maybe more. The hunters circled like wolves around a fragile cage. One of them struck the tent wall with the butt of a weapon. The fabric shivered. The girl stifled a cry and buried her face against John's chest. His arm wrapped around her instinctively. "Easy," he whispered, though his own heart pounded like thunder. The voice came again, closer this time, followed by another, rough and impatient. The tone was clear. They wanted her. They knew she was inside. John's mind raced. He could hand her over. The problem would be gone. His life would return to quiet survival. But then he looked down at the tiny alien girl holding on to him. Her glowing eyes pleaded with a silent trust, fragile but real. He clenched his jaw. "Not happening," he muttered under his breath. He moved quickly, grabbing his pack, stuffing what little he had into it. The girl looked confused, tilting her head. He pointed to the back of the tent where the fabric was weakest. "We can't stay," he whispered. "We run." The hunters shouted again, louder. The sound of a blade cutting into the sand filled the air. They were losing patience. John slashed the back of the tent open with his knife. Sand poured in as light spilled across the floor. The girl's eyes widened. Her small hands clutched his sleeve tighter. "Go," he urged, pushing her. Gently, she hesitated for 1 second, then crawled through the gap. Her glowing eyes darted nervously as she crouched low behind the dunes. John slipped after her, pulling the fabric closed behind him. He took her hand, whispering, "Stay low." Together they crawled across the sand, the dunes rising like broken waves around them. The hunters' voices still echoed near the tent, shouting, searching. For a moment it seemed they might escape, but then came the sharp whistle. The hunters had found the cut in the tent. They knew. "Run," John hissed, pulling the girl to her feet. She stumbled at first, her bare feet cutting against sharp stones, but she didn't let go of his hand. Her small frame ran beside him, glowing faintly in the morning sun. Behind them, the hunters gave chase. Boots pounded across the sand, harsh voices cutting through the wind. The sound of weapons clicked. Metal against metal. John gritted his teeth, dragging her faster. His lungs burned, but he didn't stop. He couldn't. The girl glanced back once, her glowing eyes widening in terror. A bolt of energy shot past, striking the sand just behind them. The ground exploded, spraying dust into the air. She screamed, nearly falling, but John pulled her. "Up, keep moving," he shouted, though his voice was ragged. They reached a low ridge of stone. John pulled her behind it. Both of them collapsed, panting. The girl's chest rose and fell quickly, her glowing eyes filled with tears. She clutched her neck, whispering. Something in her tongue. John peeked over the ridge. The hunters were spreading out, scanning the dunes, weapons ready. Their armor glinted under the rising sun. Strange symbols marked their shoulders, symbols John didn't recognize, but the girl clearly did. She shook her head violently, whispering the same word again and again. "Killers. Killers." John cursed under his breath. His knife felt useless against energy rifles. His choices were few: run, fight, or hide. The girl tugged his sleeve, pulling his attention. Her glowing eyes locked on him with desperate urgency. She pressed her small hand against the sand, then drew a simple shape, a circle with lines almost the same as the mark on her neck. She pointed to it, then to herself, then to the hunters. Her voice broke as she whispered a single word in broken human speech. Mine. John's blood ran cold. The mark wasn't just decoration, it was hers, a sign of ownership, maybe a claim, maybe she was property, branded like cattle. And the hunters? They were here to take back what they believed was theirs. The girl shook her head violently, her glowing eyes full of terror. She grabbed his hand, pressing it against the sand mark she had drawn. Then she whispered another broken word. Safe. John's jaw tightened. He looked down at her fragile form, at her glowing eyes begging for protection. He had never asked for this, never wanted to be part of something bigger than his own survival. But now he had no choice. He stood slowly, knife in hand, his eyes locked on the hunters moving closer. You'll have to go through me, he muttered. The girl's glowing eyes widened, shining like fire. For the first time, she looked not just scared, but hopeful. The desert wind carried the hunters closer, their shadows stretched long across the dunes, and as John tightened his grip on the blade, he knew the fight was only beginning. The human's choice. The sun climbed higher, turning the desert into a sea of blinding gold. Heat waves shimmered across the dunes, but John felt only the weight of the hunter's footsteps closing in. He crouched behind the stone ridge with the alien girl pressed against his side. Her glowing eyes searched his face desperately. Her small hand clutched his sleeve as if letting go would mean death. Voices carried through the wind, sharp and commanding. The hunters shouted to each other, spreading wider, closing the circle. They knew he was here. They knew she was with him. John's grip tightened on the small knife. The blade felt too light, too weak. But he had nothing else. The girl's breath shook against his arm. Her glowing eyes glistened with fear. He swallowed hard. His mind screamed at him to run, to abandon her, to save his own life. That would be the smart choice. That would be survival. But then he looked at her, this fragile creature who had trusted him in her most desperate moment. This child who whispered safe with trembling lips, who had clung to him as if he was the only shield she had left in the galaxy. His jaw set. No, he thought, I can't hand her over. The hunters appeared over the ridge, their armor glinted under the desert sun. Each carried weapons humming with energy. Their helmets hid their faces, but their body language spoke of confidence, of ownership. One of them pointed at the girl, barking an order. The sound cut through the desert air, harsh and absolute. The girl whimpered, burying her face into John's arm. Her small body shook. She whispered broken words. No, no. Safe. With you. John stepped forward, placing himself between her and the hunters. His knife held steady, though his hands shook. His voice was calm but firm. She's not going anywhere with you. The hunters froze for a moment, surprised. Then one of them laughed, a metallic echo beneath the helmet. Another barked something sharp in their tongue. The meaning was clear. They didn't see him as a threat. They spread out, surrounding him. John's heart pounded. The desert felt too wide, too open. Nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. He gripped, the knife tighter, sweat dripping down his neck. One hunter stepped closer, raising a weapon. The girl screamed, clutching John's back. Her glowing eyes burned with fear. John knew he had only seconds to choose. Hand her over and walk away, or fight against impossible odds. He looked back at her. Her glowing eyes met his, shimmering with tears. But behind the fear was something else. Hope, fragile but real. She believed in him. That was enough. John raised his voice, steady. If you want her, you'll have to take her from me. The hunters paused, their helmets turned toward each other, confused. Then their leader barked another command. Two hunters raised their rifles. The girl let out a broken cry. Wrapping both arms around John's waist, he felt her trembling against him. His jaw clenched. So be it. The first shot cracked through the air. A bolt of energy struck the sand near his feet. Exploding into sparks, John pulled the girl behind. The ridge, sand spraying around them. His ears rang with the sound. The hunters advanced, their steps heavy. The girl pressed her forehead against John's back, whispering again and again. Safe. 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 As if the word alone could shield them, John scanned the ridge. His eyes locked on a narrow crevice between two rocks. It wasn't much, but it was cover. He grabbed her hand, whispering, "Come on." They darted toward the crevice, another shot blazing past. The girl stumbled, nearly falling, but John lifted her, dragging her into the gap. Both collapsed inside, pressed against the stone walls. The hunters shouted again. Their shadows fell across the sand outside. They were searching, waiting, closing. In John's chest rose and fell, his knife still tight in his hand. His mind raged with doubt. I can't fight them all, but I can't give her up either. The girl reached out, her small hand resting on his. Her glowing eyes met his in the shadows. For the first time, her voice shaped his name, broken but clear. "John?" He froze, the sound hitting him harder than any weapon. She trusted him, not just as a stranger but as her protector, her safe place. John exhaled slowly. His choice was made long ago, but now it burned in his chest like fire. He would not let them take her, not while he still breathed. Outside, the hunters readied again, their weapons charged with energy. The leader's voice rang out like a hammer, demanding surrender. John leaned close to the girl, his voice steady, almost gentle. "No matter what happens, stay behind me." Her glowing eyes filled with tears. She nodded quickly, whispering again. "Safe." John stood, stepping out of the shadows. His knife glinted in the sun, his stance firm. His voice carried across the desert. "You'll have to kill me first." The hunters aimed, their rifles humming with deadly power. The girl crouched behind him, clutching her hands over her glowing mark. Her eyes never left him. The desert fell silent for one heartbeat, the air thick with tension. The next move would decide everything. John's choice was clear. He would fight. He would protect her. Even if it meant facing death, the storm of violence was about to begin. What happened next? The desert held its breath. The sun blazed above, burning the sand white. But all John felt was the cold edge of fear. The hunters stood in a half-circle before him, rifles raised, armor gleaming. Their leader barked another command, the sound, sharp and final. Behind him, the girl crouched low, her glowing eyes wide. Her small hands clutched the mark on her neck. Her lips moved silently, whispering the same word over and over. Safe, safe. John's knife felt too small. His chances felt too thin, but he didn't step back. He planted his boots firmly in the sand, his body shielding her completely. The hunters advanced. One shouted, another laughed. They thought he was nothing, just a man with a blade against weapons of war. But then it happened. The girl's mark began to glow, at first faint like a flicker, then stronger, pulsing with light that cut through the desert glare. The strange circular brand lit up, spreading across her skin. Lines of fire raced down her arms, across her chest, like living veins of light. John turned his head, eyes wide. "What?" The hunters froze too, their weapons lowering slightly. For the first time, their confidence cracked. One muttered something sharp and uneasy in their tongue. Another stepped back, shaking his head. The girl rose slowly from the sand, her small frame trembling, but her eyes burned brighter than ever. Her voice, soft yet steady, carried across the air, words in her language flowing like a chant. John felt the ground shift beneath them. The air grew heavy, charged with energy. His hair stood on end as if lightning filled the sky. The hunters panicked, shouting at each other. Their leader barked orders, but their voices wavered. They aimed their rifles again, but none fired. Fear shook their hands, the girl's glowing eyes locked onto John. For the first time, her words in broken human speech were clear. "I am not slave. I am heir." John's breath caught. The meaning hit him like a storm. She wasn't just a lost child, she wasn't property, she was royalty. The hunters roared, firing at once. Bolts of energy tore through the air. John dove forward, covering her with his body, but the bolts never struck. The light around her flared, exploding into a shimmering shield. The blasts hit and vanished like sparks into water. The girl cried out, her small body shaking, but the power held. The hunters staggered back, their rifles useless. Fear spread among them like fire in dry grass. John pushed himself up, staring at the shield in awe. His knife hung useless at his side. You did that?" The girl swayed on her feet, her glowing eyes dimming, but she nodded weakly. "Mark. Gift. Bloodline," she whispered. The hunters hesitated, then their leader let out a furious cry. He threw down his rifle and charged with a blade of his own. His armor clattered as he ran straight for them. John reacted without thinking. He stepped in front of the girl, his knife raised. The clash came fast, metal against metal. His arm shook under the strength of the blow, but he held firm. The leader snarled, striking again and again. John barely blocked each one. Sparks flew as blades scraped. Sweat poured down his face. His muscles burned. But behind him the girl whispered in her tongue, her voice a broken chant. The light grew again. With one final cry, she extended her small hands. The mark on her neck flared like fire. A burst of energy exploded outward, throwing the leader back into the sand. His blade flew from his hand, landing far away. The other hunters broke. Their courage shattered. They shouted in panic, retreating across the dunes. Their leader crawled to his knees, staring in shock, then he too fled, dragging himself away from the light. Silence fell. Only the wind whispered across the desert. The girl collapsed forward, but John caught her in his arms. Her glowing eyes dim, her breath weak. "Easy," he whispered, holding her close. "You're safe now." Her lips moved, forming his name. "John," she breathed before her eyes closed in exhaustion. John looked around at the empty dunes. His chest heaved with relief and fear. He had survived. They had survived. But nothing was the same anymore. He gazed down at her small form, resting against him, the mark on her neck still glowing faintly. His mind replayed her words. "I am heir." He realized then the truth. She wasn't just a child running from hunters. She was the heir to something vast, a throne, a bloodline, maybe even a whole empire. The hunters weren't just slavers. They were enforcers sent to claim her. And now, by stepping between her and death, he had chosen a path that tied him to her fate. The desert sun rose higher, burning away the shadows of the night. John lifted her carefully in his arms, her head resting against his shoulder, her glowing eyes closed in fragile peace. He stared at the horizon, knowing his quiet life was over. Whatever world she came from, whatever power hunted her, he was now part of it. His choice had changed everything. And in that moment, as the desert stretched endless before him, John whispered to himself, "Whatever happens, she stays safe. With me." The wind carried his vow across the sands, a promise born in fire and fear, a promise that would shake the galaxy.